Welcome back to this part 3 of our Chakra UI and Python backend based tutorial. We have already covered Chakra UI in part 2 and the Python Flask based backend in part 1. In this part 3, we are going to add the APIs in Python backend with GET and POST implementation, and then we are going to add support to backend access over GET and POST RESTful interface in our Chakra UI code. Finally, we are going to implement this proxy server which runs in the front end node server so that we could connect to our backend from our front end. So let's get started. This Python core UI combined folder does not have any folder or files in it because we are going to take the Chakra UI frontend. We will copy here and Python backend code and copy here and directly work in that code so that we can combine both Python backend and Chakra UI frontend together. Here I am at my local machine accessing the public code repo, and I will be copying this Python backend code from this location to combine here. So cp-r Python backend, and it's going to copy into Python core UI combined. The Python backend is copied here, and this project will be used to add more code so that we can build more APIs, which will be accessed by the Chakra UI frontend. Here, I will be opening a new project, which we have just copied here, Python backend, in this folder. So open in this repo. This is the code. We are going to open it. This code is open. That code is using this Python 3.8 backend runtime. This is the code which we have created in the previous project. So let's run it and make sure everything is working here. The same code is running, and as you could see, the request from front end is arrived here. It means this code is connected. Let's start adding the APIs related code in this project. Very first thing, I will be creating a folder called core. In this core, we are going to write some of those APIs which can be accessed through app.py. I will be using this code which I have already written, so it will be faster for us to access it here. So as you can see here, I have added, this is a class root API. Here we are using GET and POST. So whenever root API will be called, it can handle the GET request coming into it and POST request coming into it. And if it is a GET, it will return hello from Python backend. And if we are trying to process the POST request, then it will parse the parameters. And very first thing we need rect parse, which is part of Flask RESTful. So we will add that here. And now rect parse error is gone. It is going to parse the request. All the request parameters will be passed, and then all the arguments will be extracted. And then after that, we can look into a certain parameter within those arguments which we want to process it. So root API is defined. After that, we need to connect this root API with our Flask API. So we already have this API object. Now we need to connect this. So API dot add resource. So this is the resource which we have just created. So root API is added here, and we can say that this root API will be part of our API version v1, and it will be called hello. Resource is added, v1 hello is added, and that code should have no problem. We can see there is no error. Let's try to come here and request v1 And as you can see here that v1 hello, when we made this request, v1 hello is not accessible. So close this, debug it, and request came back. Because we have added all that references to our project, it required for us to restart it completely. And once the project is restarted, new code is updated and it is accessible. And as you could see here, the GET request is made, and that's where the results are visible here. So we have added one API, which is hello. If we are not going to access the API, our default index.html route is still working. Here you can see that we made this GET request. Now we can make this POST request using curl, and here is the parameter. I will be using this command line, and we are making this request to 8008. As you could see here, this is the request. This is the request type completed by parentheses, and here is the post request. So post request is completed. If we want to say anything word here, how are you? Here is our parameter. Here is the request. So this request type, which we are sending from this post HTTP request, that is processed by the Python code, and return is sent back to us. And that part we have seen here. Request type argument is parsed from here, and result is sent back with this message here. So now you can verify that both GET and POST are working with our Python code. Now I will be adding some code in this core folder. Let's add new file, info handler.py, and I will be adding Flask RESTful. We are importing API, resource, and rect parts because we are writing another method here. Then I am pasting this method API handler function, which is having these API endpoints info, and those endpoints can be accessed using GET or POST. Here the only thing we are trying to add in this function is the validate parameter. This means the parameters which are coming from this POST request, we will be able to validate them. So we need to write the validate parameter function in our code. So let's add new file, parameter validator.py, and here we are going to write our parameter validator function, which I have already written. As you can see here, this is our validate parameter function. It takes the request JSON, it processes it, it just say parameter received, and it returns result. Now we need to call this validate parameter in this info handler. So we already have this validate parameters. So we need to say from core dot parameters validate import validate parameters. And now we have connected validate parameter function in our info handler. So API handler function is already added. Now this function has to be connected with app.py. So we need to connect that function here. For that reason, we need to import that function first. So from core dot info handler import API handler function. So we have got API handler function here. Now we need to call that function within the API using add resource. So we are going to say API dot add resource, and we already have API add resource. Now we need API handler function. So we are accessing that, and the parameters are again v1 info. One more time, we can validate them by looking into the API handler function implementation. Here you could say we are accessing info, and parameters can be send the way we want to send these parameters. Code is added. Let's stop it, restart it. We are here. We can say v1 info. This is the GET request, and request is processed by the GET method, which is written here, hello from API handler function. If we want to test the post, we can run this. Next, we can pass request JSON. We need to put this thing in semicolon, and we can say a of 10. And as you could see here, the parameter, this is listed as here. If you want to get this value and we need to extract all those parameters from the request JSON, we need to come back here and process that code, validate parameter, and try to extract all those parameters, store their values, and return. Most of the code in this Python example is ready to be connected from Chakra UI. In the next step, we are going to write the code in the Chakra UI project and make sure that these APIs, v1 hello as well as the v1 info, are accessible from Chakra UI. Now let's work on our Chakra UI front-end code so that we can integrate the Python backend APIs which we have just created. Now we are going to copy the package.json, public and src folder from this folder to our Python core UI combined folders core UI frontend. So we go cp frontend here. Then we are also going to copy recursive, and finally we also need to copy src. Now we have all required files and folders in this project. Next step is to run npm install. Ready. Now we can perform the start server. So npm start. Let's open the Visual Studio Editor. Here we are, and this is the code where it is running. Components, implementation. We can go to data, and this is the data home where we can write today. It means it is here, and make a call to data, and there. It means that this is the code we are accessing, and this is the page it will be accessed. For our strategy, we are going to add code in this Chakra UI project so that we can access the Python backend APIs. So first thing, we need to implement the setup proxy. So we are going to add at the source level file setup proxy.js. Here is the code we are going to use with setup proxy. We are using this module called HTTP proxy middleware, and we are going to connect localhost 8008, which is this server where the APIs are implemented. So setup proxy needs this module HTTP proxy middleware. So we need to open our package.json and add the dev dependency, because this is only required for development purposes. Here I am adding the dev dependency. As you could see, React scripts are still the same version which we are using for overall dependency, and we are adding the development time dependency middleware here. Once it is added, here we can do npm install. It will basically install the middleware dependency which we need. Other option, we could have used npm-i install-i module name, and it would have done also. So modules are also available here. In the next step, we need to add the APIs where we could implement the GET and POST connection to the backend. So in the source folder, I will be creating a new folder called API, and within those API folders, I will be creating two separate connection to the backend, one for GET and one for POST. So I will call server connect get.js, and I will also be using server connect post.js, and add the code and study the code very quickly. So very first thing, get REST request, which is the get. Here you are passing the URL wherever you want. It's of course is method get. It is going to add the headers content type, which is the application JSON. Okay, and after that the results will be stored in this get result object, which other APIs which are using this get REST request method can get the result out of from this API. The check status is called here, which looks into the response. If your response status is between 200 or anything 2xx, if there are error, the error will be there. The parse JSON will happen. It will take the response and parse it, and finally get REST request object is being defined and exported. This server connect get implementation will give us the access to backend over get REST interface. Same thing we are going to do for post. I have post code here. I have pasted it. As you could see here, the difference between get and post is little REST, everything is same. Here we are sending the post body. Request is going to be there. This data is going to be sent to the backend in this body message. Everything is okay. REST is identical. The result will be stored into post result object. Body data we have to. So it means whenever we are going to make this post REST request, we need to pass the JSON body. That should be clear. Now we have added these two. It means our code is ready for get and post backend APIs to connect. So we are already in data page. What we are going to do is that we are going to implement connection to the backend in this data page. Data page is available here, components, implementation, data, and here is the data from home. So that's where we are going to implement our code. So what we are going to do is that we are going to import, and the method we have used get REST object, and as you could see here, it's already available here. Import post REST object, we have added these two. So get REST and post REST objects are added here. These are the methods which we could use in our code. Next, I will just copy code in a way which will be going to easier for us and faster. Setting up state, and here are two local state object of backend data and result message. So these two variables will be used to store into the local page state, so we could reference them. Now let's use the get connection to the backend, and here is our get connection. As you could see here, we are just creating this new function using the get REST object. It immediately gives us the access to get REST request, which is in get REST object. I just want you to make sure that you understand the get REST object here. So we are request, we are connecting to v1 hello, which is v1 hello is still working, and that will be connected here. v1 hello result from this request will be stored in this value, and we are going to see that response back to console here. Now we have defined it. We need to add component mount, and here call this hello at this point. if we load this page, the console should have this message. Here's our console. Let's reload the page. 404, it is not found, and this is not connecting. And that is because when we added this setup proxy, we did not restarted our service, because we had to make sure that implementation, which we have done recently, is available when this node server is running, which is not. Let's come back here, stop this, and run one more time. So this time, when our server will start, it will start with proxy modules already available for node server to connect with backend from the front end. Everything is started. As you could see here, we are in data, and here is the message, which is hello from Python backend. If we want to debug this, just to make sure this is hitting, you can say debugger, and if you reload this page, as you could see, we are hitting our debugger. It means the connection to the backend is working. That's all it needs for us to connect to the backend from Chakra UI front-end code. Now we are going to implement the info API, which is available here. So this is the info API, which goes to API handler function. Here is our info API, which goes, is a get implementation and this dot. And if we come back here, reload, look to console, both the get requests are working here. If you are trying to look into the network request, here you could actually see the request which we are making, hello, which is the get request, info is the get request. So both these two requests are made from front end, and they are being served by the backend, and then the result is stored into this get result object, which we are just dumping to the console. Now let's add the post request to, and if you look into the way we have make these get rest request, you see we are adding the URL, and then we are adding the result object. Exact same way we have implemented the get here, URL and object. For the post, we need to have a URL, post body, and then the return object. Come back here, we are doing the same. Here is our post data. Here is a request type, API, request JSON, and we are sending this request JSON. And this is the post data which is being passed here. And that is going with post REST object, calling the post REST request, passing the URL, body, and the result will be stored here. And this result is going to be rendered on the console first, and same results will be stored in this backend data object, which is the state variable or state object, and thus we are going to see this thing. Once we have defined this function, let's call it into when the page will be mount. Everything is there. Call this, look into the console, and now you can see here that we are getting the result from each of these methods in this console, first, second, and third. And here is the response from the post message. Just to make sure you understood the post part, so we can look into our curl method which we have used, and here you could see that we are using the v1 info and making a post call to 8008 v1 info, and here is our request, and this is the response we have got. And if we look into this request with our console, as you can see here, this is the request. It's a JSON received, and JSON received will have whatever we are sending. So here the parameter is Chakra UI with Python. Looking into this code, we are sending parameter Chakra UI with Python, and that is what you are seeing here. Next, we want to see these messages in our UI here. We do not want anything in console now because we have validated that part. Let's stop this. We can actually, this post method, we can write this backend data. So here I could use text, and this backend data I can write here, this dot state dot backend data, and let's see what happens. If we try to do this, you will see here it is not rendering, and actually there is some error. If we look into this message, you will see that there is some error because this is actually a JSON object. So we need to stringify. So the best way you could do is that you can say JSON dot stringify and everything is okay. Error is gone. And that message is listed here exactly. So that's how we got this message. If you want to process this and collect this message, if you want to process this object, I will be processing it and rendering it again. So how we can process it? Let's have a little more control. So we can say at this point, let's create a button. As soon as you are going to save, it will say button is not defined. So in Chakra UI, we need to define the button. Now we could use the button. Button is here. The click me to get message here, and we can say on click event this dot show message bind this, and we can implement this show message here. Everything is okay, but show message is empty because we haven't done anything here, and it means that whenever this button will be clicked, the result of store in this result message. So we can say here text this dot state dot result message is not equal to null, then show state dot result message, otherwise no message. As you could see here is no message. If you want to say color equals, you can add color here, no message. If it's gonna be correct, we can say color is green 400. So that will be there. So now we need to store here, and here we could say we need to process this backend because the data should be stored in backend when this post REST is. So we need to look into for the backend. We could say this dot if this dot state dot backend data dot status, because remember this status is not equal to null, and same object we need to get. If it is not null, we can say backend dot status is equal to success here. So we have this condition. If these two conditions met, we can set, we can just use this guy and just say we are storing in this result message. So this will be our result message, and this is our object which is going to have the message here at this point. So we have implemented this, and if we try to click here, we could see we reload it, there is no message. As soon as you click here, that message is coming. Here we have Chakra UI front end, here we have Python backend. So the way the code is written, but when this page loads up, it calls these three methods, and the hello info is requested, get and post, and whenever you are pressing this button, the value of your backend data is parsed and stored into result message, and we see this message. So that's all you really need in order to get your Chakra UI front end connected with your Python backend. As our objective in this tutorial is completed, the Chakra UI front end is calling Python Flask based backend successfully. So we have just pushed the code. As you could see here, this Python Chakra UI combined folder has these two folders updated, and the code from these two folders are already being pushed to the GitHub public code repo. So let's take a look at the code at GitHub. Here at the GitHub, here is our folder where we have completed our work in part 3 of this tutorial. Chakra UI frontend, here is our code. We can look into the component, implementation, and the data and data home EX. So just make sure the calls which we were making to the backends are added here, and they are working. The button we have added, the message we were writing on click, everything is updated here successfully. Same thing in the Python backend code. We need to make sure that the core APIs are implemented. Looking into the app.py, we could validate that both API handler function and the root API functions both are added. So the code is also updated. It means this code is ready for you to pull and follow the tutorial and get your Chakra UI front end connected with Python based backend. So let's recap what we have learned in this overall tutorial. First, we started with our Python backend server included with Flask and Flask RESTful modules. After that, we worked on Chakra UI frontend, and we created a basic Chakra UI frontend which has routes and folders embedded into it. So we could access different routes by passing the actual route name in the URL. That was our part 2. In the third part, we have written the code in the Python backend server to implement various endpoints such as version, API version v1/hello, v1 info. We also made sure that each of our endpoints has GET and POST request handled in it. In both cases, the backend server parse the information if needed, such as with POST request, and return the result to the front end. After we completed Python backend API implementation for GET and POST correctly, we came back to our Chakra UI front-end code and added necessary code so that we could connect to our Python backend server. We started with adding setup proxy. We needed setup proxy so that our node server, which is running on port 3000 or something else if you have changed the port, that node server is connecting to the proxy server, and the proxy server is connecting to our Python backend server. Whenever UI is connecting to the backend in development environment, the request goes through proxy. So we set up proxy first. After our proxy was ready, then we have added required modules so that our proxy is working. Next, we have implemented the request to the backend over GET and POST separately. The final code related with each part 1, part 2, and part 3 is located in their respective folder at GitHub. So please clone the code, enjoy the tutorial, and I will be seeing you in my next tutorial. That's all, my friends. If you have enjoyed our content, please like it, share it, subscribe it. And finally, please remember, be good and do good. Thank you.